All right. Well, my name is Park Ranger Jim Hollister from Minuteman National Historical Park, and I am very pleased to be joined today by historian and author J.L. Bell. So, John's first claim to fame was from his blog, which he very actively maintains, Boston 1775, with the motto History, Analysis, and Unabashed Gossip about the Start of the American Revolution in Massachusetts. And I got to say, it's such a fantastic resource for all of us students of the Revolution here in Massachusetts. And of course, recent book, The Road to Concord, How Four Stolen Cannon Ignited the Revolutionary War, which I have to say paints a very different picture about the start of the revolution than what is commonly told. So what I'd like to do is just jump right into the questions, if you're okay with that.
Great.
And so from about mid-1774 to 1775, we have a growing crisis in Massachusetts as people's thoughts turn towards possible military confrontation. So what's happening and how are people preparing for it?
Well, one of the first things that happens is that Parliament passes the Massachusetts Government Act, which changes the Constitution of Massachusetts in some fundamental ways, taking away power from the people, from their towns, and giving more of it to the royal government. That provoked political unrest, the closing of courts in the western part of the state. But then in early September 1774, General Thomas Gage tried to pacify part of Middlesex County by removing gunpowder and cannon that were used by the militia of that county from Charlestown and Cambridge. And by doing that, he provoked this uprising in the countryside, thousands of men marching towards Boston, thinking, because of exaggerated rumors, that Boston was in flames, coming to try to rescue the town from an even worse Boston massacre. Well, they realized as they got closer that there was no smoke on the horizon, there were no refugees streaming past them. They realized that all that was exaggerated, but they nevertheless took action in Cambridge in what became known as the powder alarm. And that action was the first time that the conflict switched from a political conflict, something which might be worked out through protests and the legislature, to a military conflict. And now the militia of Massachusetts and the military power of Britain, as under General Gage in Boston, were going to be in conflict. And almost immediately after that alarm, on September 2nd, 1774, both sides began to grab as much military material as they could to keep it out of the hands of the other people, and of course, to have it for their own use.
Wow, fascinating. I mean, the powder alarm, what's the scale of this event? I mean, how many militiamen were involved?
We have a number of reports from men like Dr. Thomas Young, the Reverend Ezra Stiles down in Newport. These were very strong patriots, and they liked the idea of very large numbers. So they were talking about 5,000 men on Cambridge Common.
My goodness.
Up to 20,000 men mobilized at some point during the event. Now, as just like with the Lexington alarm later, the news went out in waves. So it wasn't until the following Sunday, for instance, that the news was reaching certain parts of Western Massachusetts and Connecticut, and everybody would get upset and the militia would mobilize. And then a few hours later, the news came that it wasn't that bad. So if you count those men, you were probably counting 10,000 men at some point ready to march. The news reached Philadelphia, where the First Continental Congress was meeting, and it made them very much more militant for a short time before they got the corrective news as well.
So, I mean, it really sounds like, had things gone one way or another, I mean, the war could have started right then and there. It sounds like people were ready.
Yes, there was no, during the actual powder alarm, there was no direct face-to-face confrontation between British military troops and the militia. So because of that, there was no possibility of shooting. But both sides were very worried, you can tell from the sources, that they would be attacked by the other side. uh, and that immediately got them thinking in terms of military preparation and military action rather than just another petition or another legislative session.
Oh, wow, it's fascinating. Uh, so they're gathering arms and supplies. So what sort of military supplies are the colonists gathering, and where are they getting them from?
Well, the first thing they do, and we can see this in the town records, is that a lot of the towns go, the selectmen go and look at the town stores of gunpowder, of flints. There are some towns, especially along the Massachusetts coast, which have their own batteries, small fortifications pointing out at the ocean to keep away the hated French or Spanish in their ships. And suddenly, those cannon in the batteries are going to be much more valuable on the battlefield if they can be used. We can see selectmen going and trying to figure out where all the gunpowder we thought we had stored has gone. We can Abigail Adams writes a letter down in Braintree about people from one part of town coming to the town gunpowder storage house and taking all the gunpowder away because they felt that her part of town had too many Tories in it.
Oh.
So the first place they try to do is they try to secure their own weapons. The second thing they do is they start to try to get weapons from those shore batteries, from individuals who owned cannon. There was a man in Concord, I believe, called Duncan Ingraham, who was a merchant who had retired out to the countryside. He had 4 cannon. Why would a man have 4 cannon? Well, he was a ship's captain. In the previous war, he had probably armed his ships with these as privateers or just to keep off privateers from the other side. And they were still part of his personal inventory. The town of Concord came to him and said, "No, we're taking those. We need those more than you do." And years later, he was still petitioning in the legislature to be paid for that. So they got cannon wherever they could. And in Boston, which was under, obviously, the British military occupation, it had soldiers there, it had Royal Navy around the town. Well, there were cannon in that town as well. There were cannon at the batteries. There were cannon in the 2 armories that belonged to the town militia. And there was even a cannon in the basement of a hatter named Thomas Handison Peck. So people were trying to grab whatever they could. They were going into hardware stores and trying to buy the cannon and then smuggle it out of town. The story at the center of the road to Concord is this great mystery of how in the middle of September 1774, the British had armed guards, redcoats, outside these 2 small armories in town, which the militia used. These were buildings about the size of, say, a 2-car garage. Each of them had 2 small brass cannon inside. And then one dark and stormy night, they came to, after that night, they came to the older armory, and they discovered that a hole had been broken into the side and the cannons were missing.
Oh my God.
General Gage immediately put more guards in front of the other armory, which was right across the street from Boston Common, and the Boston Common was where the King's Own Regiment and other British Army regiments were encamped. So it seemed like a very secure place, and yet when they came to take the cannon out to make them even more safe by taking them into the British camp, once the British Army opened the front door, the cannon were gone. And those 4 stolen cannon were, I think, a great embarrassment to General Gage. And he spent a lot of time in the next several months trying specifically to track them down.
So, I mean, all right. So they have guards around the gun house, right on the Boston Common where this regiment is encamped. And they're still able to get the guns out. I mean, any idea how? I mean, obviously they didn't use magic.
Yes, it actually, I talk about this in the book, and it's so I won't reveal the whole trick, but one crucial part of it was that the camp on the Common was actually, they turned that into an asset because the Patriots moved during roll call. So suddenly there was drumming on the Common, there were sergeants shouting, there were men getting in, all the attention and a lot of noise was on the drill and figuring out where the men were and getting them lined up. and that seems to have provided a certain amount of cover for patriots to sneak in through the back door of the armory, which opened onto a yard which that building shared with another town building, a schoolhouse. And so they used the what were seemed to be obstacles, like the big fence around that yard, and turned them into assets, because that big fence, yes, in some ways it kept them out. In other ways, it hid what they were doing inside that yard from the soldiers on the common.
Wow, that is determination. I mean, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes, that's I think part of what motivated the thefts is that those militiamen of Boston, as well as the ones out at the powder alarm and everything, they felt that they were defending their traditional British rights of self-defense, of association and assembly, and they really felt that if they did not look after these rights, they were going to lose them, because they were seeing that happening at the top level of government.
Oh, certainly. And I mean, there's a deep resentment to the presence of the army in the first place. What are they doing here? Amazing. So Concord, of course, looms large as one of the principal magazines, places where these arms are deposited and secured. So why was Concord, well, first of all, Concord is actually doubly important. It was chosen as a meeting place for the provincial congress, and also one of the magazines. So why Concord?
Well, the two places which the most of the cannon were sent, that the Massachusetts Provincial Congress collected in various ways, were Concord and Worcester. And there may have been even more artillery in Worcester. Both of those towns were, I believe, they were shire towns. They were the county seats. So they were a bit larger than their neighbors. They certainly had the infrastructure of the courthouse or the meeting house where they could store things. They were far enough away from Boston to be out of easy reach of the British military. And there was although there were, in both places, there were some very avid loyalists, there was also a very strong patriot contingent who did the work of gathering those cannon, distributing them, hiding them, getting them ready for battle. That was where Colonel James Barrett took the lead in Concord. He was a provincial Congress delegate. He was eventually the militia colonel for part of Middlesex County, and he was the guy who had these cannon, including the 4 stolen from Boston armories, hidden on his farm and in his neighbors' farms.
Wow. Yeah, because it's like, you get the provincial congress meeting there, you get the supply depot going on, the gatherings of supplies. One account said that Concord, almost appeared like an armed camp.
Yes.
Soldiers came.
James Warren, the provincial Congress delegate from Plymouth, eventually the Speaker of the House, he actually wrote home to his wife, Mercy Otis Warren, saying, "This town is full of cannon." That is how many guns he saw during that provincial Congress meeting in early April 1775. Then there was a warning that General Gage was about to move, and the Patriots began to move most of the cannon away from the center of town. I think they left 4 that not only belonged to Concord itself, and Concord wanted to keep those around the townhouse. And those were the 4 that the British troops actually came and found. Everything else was dispersed, taken away, hidden, taken to other towns.
It makes the mission on April 19th to send these soldiers out to Concord to seize and destroy these things. It seems crazy, they know they're coming, and of course these things are gone. Just incredible. So we've been talking a lot about cannon, and of course, they're raising companies of Minutemen. They're reorganizing the militia. They're getting ready to raise an army of observation. But cannon really do play a prominent role in this. So I was wondering if you could talk about, why artillery was so important, in particular, those brass guns from the Boston Artillery Company.
Oh, well, okay. In one way, artillery is crucially important because it's not a an individual's weapon. Even though there were men like Duncan Ingraham or Thomas Anderson Peck who owned cannon, really you do not carry cannon to go out and shoot a deer. You do not carry cannon to guard your house, especially in the 18th century when you cannot shoot a cannon by yourself. You have to have a team. The team has to work together. And so it is a military weapon and only a military weapon. It was showing that they were ready for war. Of course, they were cannon were very effective. The small brass cannon from Boston were what were called field pieces, which were small enough to be mounted on maneuverable carriages and driven around on battlefields. And you needed those for an inland war. A lot of the cannon that they had been on ships or in shore batteries. They were larger, but they were also iron for the most part, heavier, more liable to burst if they were old. And they were not, when you have cannon on a ship or in a battery, it's on a different sort of carriage. It's not a carriage that is so maneuverable. Right. And so the big problem for the Patriots in getting their artillery force ready was building those carriages. They actually had a bottleneck where they had wheelwrights and blacksmiths and carpenters trying to build these carriages because they had the metal tubes, but they could not fire them without having some way to mount them.
Oh, incredible. I mean, these don't sound like, hapless, peaceful farmers out there,
No.
falling victim.
And this is why the story of the cannon, it has in some ways been suppressed and in some ways just been overlooked, because there is this, what David Hackett Fischer called the myth of injured innocence, the idea that the peaceful farmers of Middlesex County were just out doing their ordinary business with their guns on the town common at 3 a.m. And then the British,
I was just doing that the other night, so that's perfect.
And in fact, there was this months and months of military preparation, which the Massachusetts authorities tried to keep down and tried to keep out of the story when the war began. On the British side, General Gage also wanted to keep these cannon out of the story, I believe, because it was so embarrassing for him that they had been stolen on his watch. So even though we can look at his intelligence files and his orders, and we can see how much he was trying to get these cannon back, and yet he never told London that they had been lost in the first place. He never told his bosses what his tactics were.
Always a good move. Well, John, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk with you. I always learn so much. And I would recommend to everybody, if you haven't read The Road to Concord, How 4 Stolen Cannon Ignited the Revolutionary War, I highly recommend it. And check out his blog, Boston 1775. I always learn more every time I go there, or if I'm looking something up, it's like, oh, John's already written about it. Just fantastic.
Thank you, Jim. And happy Patriots Day to you and everybody.
All right. Happy Patriots Day to you. All right. Take care.